And let me introduce our panelist, Ágota Scharle, the senior economist of the Budapest Institute, an independent think tank. Mr. Péter Szakonyi, one of the, despite his young age, one of the doyens of the Hungarian business and economic journalists in Hungary, and also the editor of the, for some 20 years, I believe, the editor of the list of the richest Hungarians. There are some overlapping between the Black Book and his list, obviously. Mr. Dr. Martin I introduced, and Sándor Léderer, who's the director of the K-Monitor, a corruption monitoring NGO. So they will be our panelists today. And as you heard, Hungarian corruption is, first of all, there is corruption in Hungary. For those who didn't hear about this, I'm convinced. So there is something to talk about. But it is a special, it really grew into a special kind of corruption. It's not the old type of corruption when some individual favor served in return for a bribe. That exists too, for a long time. And when we were under Turkish occupation, it was called bakshish. When, you know, they had a long tradition in the Hungarian bureaucracy, and in almost every sector. But here we talk about a very different corruption, a systemic corruption, which is getting to be Hungaricum. Because of its size. And one of the best description is from a very authentic source, from Fidesz itself. A certain András Lánci, less than mediocre philosopher and the ideologue of Fidesz, in 2015 said, translation is mine, but I can give you the source, corruption is not an anomaly. It's rather an essential development strategy of Fidesz to position domestic privileged groups of clients, said, end of quote. So it is a development strategy. My first question will be that is this unique to Hungary, and is this a successful full strategy? If there is Orbanism, then what you can see in these 12 years is that the political power is more and more used to position this group of clients, family members, etc. And there's always an enemy in this dichotomic worldview of Fidesz. And in return, this enriched clients are expected to help to prolong the power of Fidesz. This is my opinion, a quite unique development, and I don't think that the European Union realized this in time. So my first question is that corruption, is this an acceptable development strategy, or it has an adverse effect on a country's economy and country's development? Ágota.
Please. some.
Okay. You don't need to be so polite. Okay. So I understand I'm the only female person on the panel, but I don't have to be always the first to respond. This is an easy question, and the answer is a clear yes. And I suppose we'll spend the next hour to discuss the details. Maybe if I can just flag one issue that that shows how or what distortions, corruptions cause in the development of an economy. Clearly, corruption has led in Hungary to the adverse selection of policymakers at basically all ranks of government structures. So, and the clear consequence is that even where the goals may be acceptable or right in any sphere of policymaking, the design of what will actually happen will be less than optimal, simply because the people who are willing to cooperate with Fidesz are usually not the best experts in the field where they operate. And then in the second round, when the measure gets implemented, there's selection in the implementers as well. So very often, even if there's no corruption involved, even if there's goodwill in the implementation, the final outcome will be less than optimal because of this adverse selection.
I just want to elaborate a little bit what you said, that Lanzi, who's not an economist, but it was remarkably cynical, but surprisingly open, this remark. He said that, and this is the claim of Fidesz, there is a fast economic development in Hungary. Look at Asia. There was the tigers, they were all ridden with corruption, but this is the price. This is an acceptable side effect for a quick economic development. That's basically in different permutations, you hear it all over, especially from the great leader. He rides this argument. It's simple, but somehow it is not. There is no proof to me of that rapid development. And if you just make any of you make a comparison, that is this true that when you have a rapid economic development, that this is an acceptable, tolerable side effect, corruption?
That's a very interesting question you raised. As an editor of this publication, the 100 Richest Hungarians, we published the first one in 2002. So that was the last year of the first Orbán government. And you know, year by year, we observe and rank Hungarian rich people. And it's very interesting to see the development of this nouveau bourgeoisie since 2020. What we could say, there is a drastic change in a business elite, in the Hungarian new bourgeoisie, and I don't want to make comments on it. I would like to tell you only facts. The first, let's say the first and possibly the most famous Hungarian oligarch was Mr. Simicska. Mr. Simicska came into the picture only in 2014, when it was clear that he owns one of the big construction company, working mostly for public procurement basis. And you know, and his, let's say, kingdom was a very short one, because 2 years later, he had a conflict with the prime minister. And that was a kind of a breakthrough in Hungarian economy as well, because previously, Simicska dominated the Hungarian oligarch scene. And later on, Orbán changed his strategy and created an inner circle of the so-called NER business or NER economy. So what we can see now, and this clearly shows this publication, there are not only 2 or 3 people dominates this NER economy, but at least there are at least 20, 25 people who are in the inner circle of let's call present-day economy. And which is more interesting than this, apart from the inner circle, there is a wider circle, about, let's say, 200 or 300 people who have benefit from the public procurement and who can control the business, the Hungarian economy, mostly. And I think, going back to your original question, István, that corruption, or that type of corruption, is widely accepted, unfortunately, within the business society and by everyday people as well. And I think that's very, very dangerous. What is more dangerous is the last, let's say, 8-10 years, during the last 8-10 years, the market economy is partially or totally destroyed. And there is no place for free competition, because that circle, the inner circle and the outer circle, controls the vast majority of the Hungarian economy. As Péter showed you in one of the slides. And I think that is the most dangerous and sad development of the last 10 years or 12 years.
I would just make one comment to this, which I think, and it's very important also in the light of the corruption definition of Mr. Lánci, but also regarding the essay of Mr. Scharle at the end of the Black Book, which is, I think, the fact that Hungary has a dual economy, and economic policy in Hungary is very much driven by the politics of Fidesz, a very partisan way of, what economy should actually serve. And here Fidesz has a very clear mission of, changing the elite of the country. So it is kind of, I guess he looks at himself as a messiah who needs to transform this country from the bottom into a very different direction. And in this case, I think corruption became one of the tools of this kind of capital transfer, not only in terms of economic capital, but also what they do in culture and in many spheres of public life. So in this regard, I think I would say we need to differentiate a bit into how we can at all speak about economic development in a classical way, how you imagine market economies, and this very special development model Orbán imagined, that he combines transforming Hungary into a conservative, whatever type of nation, and of course his duty to run the country somehow, because people still go to elections, and if there's no food on the table, there's going to be riots. So there must be some kind of development. And I think this is clearly what you can see if you look on the Hungarian economics, that you have one sphere of it shaped by multinational companies, playing a huge role in contributing to the Hungarian economy and also employment. And the Orbán always created a very, very favorable environment for these companies to come here. Extreme subsidies, government subsidies went to these companies. The whole structure of the special investment schemes, where they are released of all kinds of, or practically have not to ask for permits and can quickly construct factories, buildings, and so on. The whole change of the labor law and the protection of workers. This, I think, was one of his strategies to attract capital and then keep another share of the economy for himself and the development of his clientele. And I think you need to take this duality into account. And I think I cannot tell, or I think it's very hard to tell at this run whether Orbán's economic policy, let's say, because of this duality, how it, in terms of GDP growth, actually impacted Hungary's fate. But I think what you can clearly see, and this is the connection to what Ágota said, is that I think the quality of Hungarian businesses, because in this sphere where SMEs could thrive and develop, and Hungarian companies could organically grow and become real regional champions, this is simply not happening because the allocation of whatever fund subsidies does not happen according to merit. Even worse, if you just want to do a business because you're keen about something and have a mission in whatever industry, you quite soon will end up at confronting certain walls because there might be a government interest or a government crony's business that will have support from the background. So I think these two things happen parallelly.
Agreeing what was just said, just would like to refer to the initial question of István, to this sentence, that whether we had rapid economic development in this country. And let's make it clear that we didn't have such kind of rapid economic development. This statement is supported by facts. In my short presentation, I've already given you some facts. So in terms of GDP per capita, Hungary is lagging behind all the V4 countries. Well, with Poland we are on the same level approximately, but Czech Republic and Slovakia is much ahead of Hungary. But also if we fix, for example, the GDP at the time of accession to the EU in 2004 or in 2010, and we observe the cumulative development or cumulative growth rate since then we all find that Hungary is the laggard when it comes to the cumulative development since 2004, or one of the laggards when it comes to the development since 2010 of the whole region. So not only of V4, but of the whole region. But this is only the GDP. What is more interesting, I think, is that basically the current Hungarian economic policy sacrificed the short-term gains for the long-term development. So I do think that we have to differentiate between the growth rate and the development figures. So the growth rate might be substantial, as 4 or 5 rates growth is quite substantial, but on the other hand, we did not have, or we do not have substantial inclusive and sustainable development in this country. Why? Because all the other preconditions of all the preconditions of this development, such as education, healthcare, innovation, institutional capacities, they are all in very, very miserable state in this country, and it has not improved at all in the past 10 years. So all in all, we cannot say that it is simply not true if we confront our views with the facts. We cannot say that there are or there has been a rapid economic development. And I think what Sándor said, it's really very important and very interesting about the duality of the economy. I would just add that I think that there is a double duality of the economy. The first duality is the initial duality between the multinationals and the SMEs. And there is a second duality which you were referring to. It is that there is two branches or two different parts of the economy. One is so-called market-oriented, and the other is a totally parallel universe, the so-called NER realm. By NER we mean this system of national cooperation, which Fidesz labeled its system itself. And this NER realm is extremely big and extremely strong, and totally functions differently than the market principle. Okay.
Just one more thing, and the third duality is between the rich and the poor, and it's very interesting. Let me tell you just two data. In 2002, when I published the first rich list, the entry level was 2.3 billion Hungarian forint. That was about, at that time, it was 10 million euros. In last year, in 2021, the entry level was 35 million euros, which is about 13 million Hungarian forints. And they don't want to bore you with statistics, but one more thing I should like to add is that the overall wealth of the 100 richest Hungarians was 635 billion forints in 2002, and it was almost 10 times more last year. So that clearly shows that the richest get the rich people get richer, and unfortunately, and this clearly shows the Hungarian statistics, that the poor get poorer.
I would like to further elaborate on this question a little bit. First of all, Peter, I would as an economic historian, I would protest to call this group bourgeoisie. Let's make sure not even nouveau. Let's call them oligarchs, because the bourgeoisie has some cultural niveau attached to, or assumption of cultural niveau. This group, it didn't get further than orgies on yachts and Michelin restaurants and whatever. So I think we don't have Buddenbrooks in Hungary. So if you permit me this distinction, but I still would interest on your opinion that this so-called Hungarian model or development, is there any? Because the Hungarian corruption is unique. Is the model unique? Because and the achievement is unique. And presently, we have a skyrocketing inflation. We have the highest the state deficit and state in debt. Even the National Bank forecasted that they're gonna run a debt. So I really, and there's an incredible pauperization of the Hungarian population. But with this model, somehow you don't see the achievement. Somehow it seems that these big success stories are really politically based. And the person you mentioned, Mr. Shimichka, is a good example. When it was out of favor, Mr. Orbán pulled the plug, and he was in a free fall. You know, it's not a real solid bourgeois. It's really the Putin model. So I want to elaborate a little bit. Is there a Hungarian model?
I call this group a bourgeoisie because it's not a homogeneous group of people. You can call a part of them oligarchs, because they are oligarchs. They depend on the state money, our money. That's true. But interestingly enough, in the last 3 or 4 years, it clearly shows that those businessmen who had been involved in market economy started to get closer to oligarchs and make business with oligarchs. You know, such a successful businessman like József, the founder of Wizz Air, which is a real success story, not only a Hungarian but a European business story. He made a deal, and he constantly make deal with oligarchs and the government. And I can make you a list of different business people who started and became successful, and then joined the oligarchs, cooperate with oligarchs, and that's why we have to make a fine-tuning in that term as well. So it's a sophisticated model now, not as purely and clearly bureaucratic or bribery, because the Hungarian economy is deeply penetrated with corruption. And corruption is not black and white, like of my publication, the cover of my publication, but it's gray and different shades of gray, black and white. Péter? Sorry. His father was my good friend, fellow journalist of mine, and he was called József.
Okay, so I tend to agree what Péter said. So I think the situation is more nuanced what you described. I do think that there are lots of beneficiaries of the system, and not only those 4 or 5 oligarchs which are the closest to the government. And Péter mentioned József, but also we can mention Daniel Jelinek, for example, who accumulated their wealth totally or to a large extent on market base, and now they are doing deals with the government. So I think if we want to depict the situation precisely, then we have to acknowledge this fact that a large part of the economy is doing businesses with this realm, and the line very much blurred between the two. So it's not always. Sometimes it's easy. In some sectors, it's easy to differentiate between the realm and the market players. But in some sectors, it is very, very, very difficult, and some sectors are totally captured by the crony companies. So I would rather use, instead of oligarchs, the crony companies. So for example, in the construction sector, there are only crony companies or loyal companies to the government. So that's why for the public procurement in the construction sector, the government even do not have to rig the procedures, because there are only crony or only loyalist companies in that very sector. What I think, and we haven't spoken about it a lot yet, but what I think is the most harmful in this system, it's not that it channels substantial money to oligarchs. That is also very harmful, but is even more harmful. This is the erosion of the norms. So basically, morally, it gives an example to the population that you can be rich, you can prevail, you can be successful only if you are loyal to the government. This is extremely, extremely harmful for the development of Hungary, and I think it backfires rather soon than later.
So further to that, it's not only the norms, but it's also the decisions about where to invest, and this does not only affect business but also individual people. So you've already mentioned pauperization, and that is affected in at least two channels. One is that very little money is spent on programs or measures that would support mobility of the population, so that would support the disadvantaged, the low educated, the low skilled, the long-term unemployed, simply because the programs that would support that part of the population are those that are less easy to control, where corruption is more difficult to happen, or the other way around, if the donors or a well-meaning bureaucrat decides that they do want to control corruption, they would go for projects where the outcomes are tangible, such as you give people laptops or build a school. So the investment goes into concrete and, I mean, in the literal sense, building blocks and concrete rather than human capital investment. So if you look at the past 10 years, the money spent on supporting social mobility through social investment, it's incredibly limited compared to what would be needed. And another channel is that where this distortion happens is in the minds of people. So when people, especially young people, deciding on their career, if they decide on what to invest, they go for networks, investing in connections and networks rather than investing in schooling or skills, simply because this is what they, especially if they are in a disadvantaged position and do not see other role models. The model they see is that I need to be friends with the mayor, I need to be friends with the next person that I can be connected within the network, rather than stay in school and improve my skills.
Thank you. I think that we came to norms is a very important point, because I understand what you said, József, that sometimes some people are more corrupt, some people are less corrupt, everybody is making a deal, but then this is the narrative. It is that we go ahead, just look around, stadiums are mushrooming in the country one after the other, and one day when we accumulated enough, Jay Gould or Commodore Vanderbilt, they weren't that, ethical knights. Either that one day when we accumulated enough, we are strong enough with our competitors, then we will stop being corrupt. Now I have serious doubt about this, but let's now talk about those who are not beneficiaries of this corruption. One of the most recent and most striking figure is published by the GKI, the Economic Research Institute, where they published that over 800, I know exactly the figure, 814 settlements in Hungary, the average yearly income is around €1,000, not monthly. Average yearly income. I say this again because I didn't believe it. There are altogether 3,100 settlements in Hungary. 814 of them is so poor that the average yearly income is between 300 and 350,000 forints. These are small, and they all vote for Fidesz, by the way. They're so poor that the average yearly income is around €1,000 or less than.
Is this the personal income tax base?
Nem ad éves átlag jövedelem.
But what's the source of that?
A GKI.
But that should be, it's either per capita or the tax base. Otherwise, I don't think
I have to look this up, but it was all over India. All over. The figure is solid. The head of the GKI.
I don't contest the figure. I'm just curious about the exact definition of what income it is about, because it does. If it's overall, even if it's per capita income, it sounds too low to be true. So I'm suspecting it's the tax base.
Yeah,
because then it doesn't include pensions, etc.
Average income. That was the.
Okay. And we go on.
But anyway, we can specify it. It's not going to be much higher, I suspect. So, and in Hungary, Hungary became one of the poorest countries of the European Union. That's a fact. We can discuss, is there a correlation between poverty, inequality, and corruption? This is my second question. If you read these stories and do this research, what is the because you can't help seeing what's happening. Just like with the corruption, we went down, and with poverty, we also went down. Hungary, some 2 million people under the poverty level of the European Union.
My answer is definitely yes. I live partly in the countryside, in a small village in the northern part of Lake Balaton, which is not the worst place in Hungary. But I spent half of my time living there, so I can see what is happening in the countryside, what is happening, how a little village can work and live. And that's very, very interesting. First of all, there is a business side of the life, and this is dominated by local, let's say low-ranking NER people, and they have got everything. They get all the public works, the local public procurement thing, and so on and so forth. This is one of the key elements. The second one is the power of local mayors. And these guys are in the hands of the ruling government. And they distribute different sources, I mean, financial sources, among the people who live there. And these two work in cooperation. And that's very sad. And if I speak to those people in this small village, they criticize the present situation. They criticize and they observe the corruption. But they are, unfortunately, the room to maneuver is limited. They have to live in this small place. They have to live under these circumstances, and they don't see the way out of this. And this is very sad. And I agree with István. I think the poverty, even in this very village, the poverty is visible. Even though this village is about 4 kilometers only from Balatonfüred, or 10 kilometers from Veszprém, highly developed places in Hungary.
Yeah, for me this all fits into this picture that, and in this regard, I regard as agreeing with Mr. Lánchí, but from a different perspective, that corruption is the essence of Fidesz policies, in a sense that they use their power not to serve the common good. I mean, in a normal government, the government's key aim would be to develop its citizens, to develop the wealth of citizens, to close social gaps. and so on, which happens in normal country where people have luck with their governments or where they're located. But here the whole thing is about the creation of this Fidesz state, and it's a power game. And in this sense, social classes are elements of this game, and the poor people serve here as a class which should be dependent from the constant power elite, exactly because of what you said. In this regard, you can buy their votes, you can in a very cheap way, attract them before elections or manipulate them because they have no access to education, they have no own, they feel that they have no own right of doing anything because they're totally dependent on government transfers. So this is one aim of this government, to have this class there which can be manipulated. And then another tool is dependencies, creating dependencies in the, let's say, upper middle class, that you keep voting on Fidesz even if you don't agree with their, certain policies, but because you get that level of, tax exemptions and different benefits that you just you're interested in keeping this government. And then the super top level is what was mentioned as well, dependencies within the business elite that you're forced to collaborate with the government. And once you did businesses together with one of these cronies, you will have a hard time to criticize them, and you will try to find and apologize those who are part of the system. So I think it's a very cleverly orchestrated social model, which is totally driven by corruption, because all the relations in this system are based on corruption and not of merit or people's passion towards life or whatever should be, I think, drivers of human interactions and business interaction and whatsoever.
Yes. I fully agree that there's this political demand for keeping poor people in a position of dependence. But there are also at least two mechanisms which harm not only the poor but also the lower middle classes. And one is that because of corruption, there's a general lack of transparency in how government bodies operate. So there's very little information on the actual performance of government agencies. This is clearly because if you increase transparency, it's just easier to track corruption. But this backfires on the quality of services as well. Basically, any measure of new public management that you would like to introduce sooner or later runs into this block that you cannot introduce measurable indicators. You cannot look into how the money was spent within any sphere of government services. If I can just quickly mention one example, one area which is incredibly important, which is adult education. Huge numbers in the population would need upskilling. And in that sphere, it would be very easy to introduce quality assessment and measurement. All you would need to do is to link the records of people who went through training to their tax records to check what happens in the next 5-6 years, what happens to their employment level and to their wage level. All the data is there, all the infrastructure is there, even the legal infrastructure is there to create such a database and make it searchable by basically everybody, job seekers and government agencies, and the training providers themselves, but it's still not working. And why? I think the answer is corruption. It would just be, even if it's only 10% of this market which is affected by corruption, that's enough to block the whole reform from happening. And another mechanism which I think is important but probably less talked about is that from pretty much the same reasons, so the closeness of government institutions, they don't want outsiders to look into what's going on inside the institution. This blocks cooperation between government bodies as well, and also, and very much so, between the civil sector and the government sector. which is a huge problem in the area of social development, because so the problem that we have poverty and we have low mobility has been with us for 30 years. It's not a new thing. But it's always been a fairly big problem, which would have needed constant, deep, constructive cooperation between government bodies, the civil sectors. And this wasn't a happy story even 10 years ago. So the starting point of where Fidesz picked up the job wasn't very easy already. But corruption has made it even more difficult, because it has practically frozen local cooperation, or cooperation at the local level between the agents who should be able to cooperate in order to solve this age-old problem of lack of skills and long-term unemployment, segregated housing for the Roma, etc.
Just three very brief comments. So what Sanyi described very rightly, it's a kind of neo-feudalism in the rural areas. So this kind of dependence. And I think those of you who come from Western countries can hardly imagine, at least, well, living here you can imagine perhaps more, but still you can hardly imagine how it works. So it's really a total dependence from the mayor and from those people who are around the mayor. For example, just to cite an example, after the 2019 municipal elections, I spoke to a mayor of a small town very close to Budapest, and he said to me that the former mayor, the former Fidesz mayor, ran the municipality and that small town in a totally informal basis, basically outsourced the competencies to a person who was not even employed by the city council, so by the municipality. So such kind of informality, which it simply cannot be imagined in any of not only, I would say, not only Western European countries, but also I believe in many of Central and Eastern European countries either. The second thing that so the whole thing in economic point of view, I think it's optimized from economic point of view. It's optimized or for the upper middle class and the elite. To quote the famous expression of one of the most renowned social scientists, József, she said once that it's a perverse redistribution. So in normal countries, money flows from the rich to the poor. In this country, in many respects, the money flows from the poor to the rich. This is served by the flat tax as well as other measures. So the whole system, the whole regime is optimized for layers above the middle class. And the third thing in connection with poverty and inequality question, what I would like to mention is that we have studies that it's much more because of this feudal structure and because of the power politics that was mentioned, it is much more difficult to break out from the poverty now than it was, let's say, even 10 years ago. So people are stuck in their situation, and that is the actual aim of the government, that the poor stay poor and cannot break out from that. So it is proven by statistical figures that it's much more difficult to break out from the poverty than beforehand.
And this is especially sad if someone knows the background of Mr. Orbán, who himself said that he grew up in a poor environment. Here I just have to call your attention for those who are interested, because in English a study by Mr. Imre Kovács and his associates, which perfectly describes this refeudalization of the Hungarian countryside. And he said the key is that Fidesz is so perfectly controls the allocation and the redistribution mechanisms in the countryside that everybody, those who loyal are rewarded, those who not, they are made dependent, and you kill more than one bird with one stone, because you have the voters, and also you eliminate equal opportunity, you eliminate social mobility, competition. You only can run a business if it's approved by the local capo or whoever. So it is a very, very sad description, and if you read it, it's not in this book, but it is an also very important segment. The life and blood of this whole system is corruption, and this is very sad. My last question before we finish is that the recent, if you want to reflect, and then I give the floor to the audience. If you want to reflect on the recent decision of the European Court of Justice, because the Hungarian corruption is partly fed by European funds, do you think there will be any meaningful change? Though the Hungarian, those who don't know, the Hungarian propaganda presents this decision that it's nothing about corruption or EU funds. It's really about that we Hungarians oppose the idea of the EU of sex-changing operations for kindergarten goers, that you send in the morning your little László and you get back a piroska in the evening, and we're going to have a referendum on the same ballot where we vote for the representatives of the next assembly. It is bizarre. It is bizarre, but it's true. And not a word about corruption, but we know that it is about corruption. Do you expect any meaningful change?
Well, I think it's very hard to tell at this point whether that mechanism will be more efficient than previous ways or previous or existing mechanism the EU already has. I'm hopeful in a sense that I think there is now a political momentum, because it became after a decade, so it took, I think, both the EU and also many member states some time to realize what happens in this country. But at least I think there is a political pressure to at least safeguard the EU's financial interest. It's, as you said, not about intervening into Hungarian politics at all. It was the whole concept of rule of law mechanism was narrowed down to this conditionality, which means it has to impact EU funds. So it's totally about corruption and nothing else. But we also saw that there were so many compromises on the road to get here that then this is my concern, that there will be also several deals until we reach to the point that, let's say, the Commission has initiated the process and then the Council acts, which probably would soonest happen by autumn in a best case scenario. I think the cases based on which you could trigger the mechanism are quite obvious, but if you look on the fact that the EU is still, or the Commission is still working on these guidelines, how to trigger the mechanism, this is for me still the case that, okay, they're narrowing down the focus, and there's going to be so many deals in between triggering the procedure and having the procedure started that let's see. But I think it's a milestone in this whole question whether you can enforce anti-corruption in member states that are themselves not taking care about public assets and public funds.
We have still 15 minutes. If someone has a burning question, then, and if you don't mind, introduce yourself, and I think we should, I give you the...
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Rafael Schroeder. I'm the Deputy Head of Mission of the Belgian Embassy in Budapest. Thank you very much for Transparency International for organizing this event. Very interesting panel discussion. I had two questions linked to one thing you said in the report. At the end, in the afterwards, you said that the public in Hungary got accustomed to corruption. In a recent discussion that the CU organized, Princeton scholar Kim Lane-Schepele talked about what could happen if the opposition would win the election, and she talked about the skeletons in the closet theory, being that once the opposition is in power, they have access to archives, to information that would allow them to really put in the press, at least in the independent press, on the internet, to show all these alleged corruption cases. Do you think that this would have a genuine, strong impact on public opinion in Hungary? That was my first question. No, that's actually my only question because you answered the other one. Thank you.
So who wants to answer this, my old friend Kim question and wishful thinking that if the opposition wins, then there will be a cataclysm that will help to stop this.
Okay. So, well, yeah, corruption has been a long-standing phenomenon in Hungary, so we should not expect any change from one day to another, or 1 year to another, or from one government to another, which does not mean that government change will not mean anything. It would mean lots of things, because as you rightly said in your question, lots of things can be uncovered, and that might to certain extent for sure fine-tune or decrease the tolerance of corruption, the tolerance vis-à-vis corruption of the Hungarians. What we can observe now, so it's always hard to predict what will happen, but what we can observe nowadays is that we have a strong tension between the awareness of the population vis-à-vis corruption, including, by the way, the state corruption as well. So all of our data, and also the data of the Eurobarometer, says that people are aware, despite the media capture and despite this feudal type of linkages into society. Most of people are aware of the serious corruption situation, but for some reason they tolerate it as well. That is also supported by the facts. So this is sociologically a very interesting and tension between these two facts. In case of a government change, I think what will be the most important, in my view, is that how the new government will handle not only the previous government's corruption, which is going on currently, but also how transparent the new government will be. For sure, if there is a government change, there will be, or there might be, a momentum that, and it might be even a game changer. Even historically, we don't know what will happen, of course, but it is in the cards for sure that the government says that from now on we get rid of our troublesome past in this respect, and from now on we will be transparent, and we will introduce measures which will, for example, to put the public contracts to the websites, and the government might have a leap towards the transparency. If that happens, then it legitimizes the fight against corruption. So I think it will. Returning to your initial question, I don't think that the government change in itself can be a game changer, but it can be a game changer if the new government's measures point out towards transparency and accountability, a kind of introduction of a new culture contrary to the culture of corruption in which we are living in.
One of the promises of the present opposition is to revise previous deals. And I think that will be a kind of a breakthrough if it happens. If I think, and I hope there will be a new government coming to power on April the 4th. The first and one of the most important issues will be how to revise and what to revise and how to sanction, how to take back national property, which was sold in the last 12 years to different business circles. I know this is a very tough job. It would be a very tough job and sometimes almost impossible to make and fulfill this desire of everyday people. But this will be the key element. This will be the most important job the new government should do.
I just welcome more questions. I feel I have to make a distinction here, which I made at the beginning, that Hungarians or Romanians are not corrupt by birth, or it's not in their blood, and versus, let's say, the Belgians. There is corruption. There is corruption, which I call corruption of desperation, which was described very well by the late János Kornai and István Gáborer. When there is a shortage economy, and you only can get things that you feel if you make a bribe, that's a corruption of desperation. There's nothing to do, which is in this book. It is, yeah, there is a culture of corruption. It's old habits die hard. I admit that. But when you have a totally run down health system, you feel that, and you want to save one of your relatives, you feel that that's what you have to do, is to bribe someone, because everything is so bad, that's your last resort. Now, by the way, the government very successfully fought against medical workers in taking extra fees from patients. But it didn't make the health system or the education system better. I think what about Kim Lane-Chappell is talking about is this massive state corruption, and when the skeletons fall out, they start to accuse each other, saving their skin. I would love to see that, by the way. So, other questions?
My name is György Farkas. I'm also with the Belgians. So you spoke about the difficulty to break out from poverty in the rural areas, and I saw that there was a decline in one of the main tools of to create dependency, which is the közmunka program. So in 2016 there were 250,000 people working in this local programs, and in 2020 there was around 100,000. Could you explain this decline? Are there any new tools to create dependency?
No, I think it's more a product of other factors and considerations. One of that is labor shortage. So, if in rural areas you no longer have any people to pick up your strawberries or so to do labor in agricultural production, you turn to the government and tell them, please release these people from public works because we don't have enough hands. And I think this is one of the main reasons for that. And probably there's also demographics behind, which is working more in more like a long-term trend, but it's there that the people who are in public works are in their 50s, most of them, and as those people age, and the inflow is luckily a little bit smaller, partly for demographic reasons and partly for some improvement in education due to earlier investments. So these people just age out of the system. So that's, I think, both factors.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time. Is there any question? I don't want anybody to leave not being able to ask the question. If not, then thank you very much. And our show will go on. If you happen to be in Brussels next Monday, or if you have friends who can tell, it will be in the Brussels Press Club, 4 o'clock next Monday. And will be interesting members of European Parliament like Daniel Freund and others who are very interested in Hungarian issues. So you all welcome to alert your friends and associates for that event too. And I especially thank the panelists of this morning work. Thank you.